The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountainside as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison checked his gear one final time. His team of Navy SEALs had been inserted into this godforsaken valley 3 days ago with what seemed like a straightforward mission: locate and eliminate a high-value target who had been coordinating attacks against coalition forces. What they found instead was a carefully orchestrated trap that would test every ounce of their training and brotherhood. Morrison's radio crackled to life. "Phoenix Lead, this is Overwatch. We've got movement on your 6, approximately 2 clicks out." The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen, a Marine sniper who had been providing long-range support from a ridge nearly a mile away. Her presence wasn't part of the original mission plan, but when intelligence reports suggested the target might have additional security, Command had positioned her as insurance. The team consisted of 6 operators, each handpicked for their specialized skills. Besides Morrison, there was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, their demolitions expert whose steady hands had saved them countless times. Petty Officer First Class Tommy Tank Williams served as their heavy weapons specialist, carrying enough firepower to level a small building. The team's medic, Hospital Corpsman Second Class David Park, had already proven invaluable during their insertion when one of their number had taken shrapnel from an improvised explosive device. Petty Officer Second Class Alex Novak handled communications and electronic warfare, his equipment allowing them to intercept enemy transmissions and coordinate with supporting elements. The youngest member of their group, Petty Officer Third Class Ryan Foster, was their designated marksman, though his youth belied the deadly precision he brought to every engagement. The intelligence package they'd received painted a picture of Ahmad Khalil, a former Afghan army colonel who had defected to the Taliban and quickly risen through their ranks. Khalil wasn't just another regional commander, he was the architect behind a series of sophisticated ambushes that had claimed the lives of dozens of American and Allied troops. His compound, nestled in a valley that local fighters called the Graveyard of Invaders, had become a symbol of resistance that needed to be eliminated. What the intelligence hadn't revealed was the true scope of Khalil's operation. As Morrison's team moved through the rocky terrain toward their target, they began to notice signs that this wasn't just a hideout but a major staging area. Fresh tire tracks crisscrossed the mountain paths, and the smell of diesel fuel hung heavy in the air despite the remote location. Rodriguez was the first to spot the weapons cache hidden beneath camouflaged tarps. "Boss," he whispered into his throat mic, "we've got enough hardware here to outfit a small army. RPGs, mortars, and what looks like some serious anti-aircraft equipment." The discovery changed everything. This wasn't just an elimination mission anymore, they had stumbled onto what appeared to be preparations for a major offensive against coalition forces. Morrison made the call to headquarters, requesting immediate extraction and a larger force to secure the area. The response came back within minutes: "Phoenix Lead, extraction not possible at this time. Heavy weather moving in, and we've got reports of enemy reinforcements converging on your position. You're authorized to proceed with mission objectives and destroy any materials of military value." Tank Williams positioned himself at the team's rear guard while Park tended to Foster, who had aggravated his earlier injury during the climb. Novak worked frantically to establish better communications with their support elements, but the mountain terrain was interfering with their satellite uplinks. From her Overwatch position, Chen reported increasing activity in the valley below. "Phoenix Lead, I'm counting at least 40 tangos moving toward your position from the south. They're armed and moving with purpose. You've got maybe 20 minutes before they reach your perimeter." Morrison felt the familiar calm that came with imminent combat. His team had been in worse situations, though not many. The plan was simple: plant charges on the weapons cache, eliminate Khalil if possible, and fight their way to a secondary extraction point 3 kilometers north of their current position. The first shots came from the east, where 2 Taliban fighters had stumbled across Tank's position while conducting their own reconnaissance. The heavy weapons specialist's response was swift and decisive, his suppressed rifle dropping both men before they could raise an alarm. But, in the thin mountain air, even suppressed gunfire carried further than usual. Within minutes, "Foster won't make it if we stay exposed like this." Novak had finally managed to establish contact with their air support, but the news wasn't encouraging. "Phoenix Lead, be advised that weather is deteriorating rapidly. Fixed-wing assets are grounded, and rotary wing support is limited to emergency extraction only. The Taliban fighters were closing in from three sides, using the rocky terrain to their advantage as they bounded from cover to cover. Their tactics showed training and coordination that went beyond typical insurgent operations. These weren't just local fighters, they were experienced combatants who understood how to trap and eliminate special operations forces. Chen's voice cut through the chaos on their radio frequency. "Phoenix Lead, I've got eyes on your position. There's a cave system approximately 100 meters north of your current location. If you can reach it, you'll have defensive positions and concealment from the approaching storm." Morrison assessed their situation quickly. Foster was in no condition to move far, Rodriguez was committed to destroying the weapons cache, and the enemy was closing in from multiple directions. The cave system Chen had identified might offer temporary respite, but reaching it would require exposing themselves to concentrated enemy fire. "Tank, I need you to lay down covering fire while Rodriguez finishes with those charges," Morrison ordered. "Park, can Foster be moved at all?" The medic's response was grim. "He's stable for now, but moving him under fire could kill him faster than staying put." The decision was made for them when a rocket-propelled grenade exploded against the rocks 20 meters from their position, showering them with debris and temporarily deafening the entire team. Through the ringing in his ears, Morrison could hear the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. Rodriguez triggered the timer on his explosives and began a fighting withdrawal toward the cave system, his rifle barking as he engaged targets of opportunity. Tank's machine gun provided a steady rhythm of suppressing fire, forcing the advancing Taliban fighters to seek cover and buying precious seconds for the team's movement. The first mortar round landed short, sending up a geyser of rock and dirt. The second was closer, close enough that Morrison felt the concussion wave through his body armor. They were walking the rounds in, adjusting their aim with each shot. Chen's rifle spoke from the ridge, and Morrison watched one of the enemy spotters drop like a stone. Her shooting was keeping the mortar teams from getting accurate range, but she couldn't stop them all. Park had managed to rig a makeshift stretcher for Foster using their packs and rifle straps. The young SEAL was conscious but pale, his lips moving in what might have been prayers or curse words. Either seemed appropriate under the circumstances. Novak reported that he was picking up radio chatter indicating more enemy forces were en route to their position. "Boss, it sounds like they've been planning this for a while." We walked right into their web. The realization hit Morrison like a physical blow. This hadn't been a trap set for just anyone, it had been specifically designed to catch American Special Operations Forces. Khalil had used himself as bait, knowing that his high-value status would draw exactly the kind of small, elite team that was now fighting for their lives in his valley. As if to confirm his worst fears, Morrison's earpiece crackled with intercepts that Novak was translating in real time. "They know we're SEALs," Novak reported grimly. "And they know exactly how many of us there are." The cave entrance was still 50 meters away when the next mortar barrage began. This time, the rounds were aimed with deadly precision, bracketing their position and forcing them to take whatever cover they could find among the rocks. Morrison realized that someone with serious military training was directing the enemy fire. Rodriguez's charges detonated with a thunderous roar that echoed through the valley, sending a mushroom cloud of smoke and debris high into the morning sky. The explosion was so massive that it triggered small rockslides on the surrounding slopes and temporarily silenced all gunfire as both sides dealt with the shock wave. When Morrison's hearing returned, the first thing he noticed was Chen's voice on the radio, urgent and strained. "Phoenix Lead, you've got major problems incoming. I'm seeing vehicles, lots of them, heading up the mountain road. This is about to get a lot worse." The SEAL team had perhaps minutes before they would be completely overwhelmed. The cave system offered the only chance of defensive positions that might allow them to hold out until weather cleared enough for air support. Morrison made the call that would define the rest of their lives. All Phoenix elements were making a run for those caves. "Tank, your rear guard. Rodriguez, take point. Park, you and Novak get Foster to safety. We move in 30 seconds. The 30 seconds stretched into eternity as each man prepared himself for what might be their final sprint. Morrison checked his ammunition count, said a quick prayer, and prepared to lead his team into whatever hell awaited them in the mountains of Afghanistan. Behind them, the smoke from Rodriguez's demolition work still rose into the sky like a funeral pyre, while ahead lay only uncertainty and the promise of more violence. The storm clouds that had been gathering all morning finally opened up, releasing a torrent of rain that would turn the dusty mountain soil into treacherous mud. As the first drops hit Morrison's face, he couldn't help but think that even the weather seemed to be conspiring against them. What none of them knew was that their real salvation lay not in the caves they were desperately trying to reach, but in the steady hands and sharp eyes of a Marine sniper who was about to make the most important shot of her career. Chen had been watching the developing situation through her scope, calculating angles and distances, waiting for the moment when everything would depend on her ability to place a single bullet exactly where it needed to go. The story of the next few hours would become legend among Special Operations Forces, a tale of brotherhood, sacrifice, and the kind of courage that can only be measured when everything is on the line and there's nowhere left to run. The sprint to the cave entrance became a nightmare of mud, bullets, and sheer determination. Morrison's team moved in a coordinated bound, each SEAL covering the others as they advanced through increasingly heavy enemy fire. The rain had turned the rocky ground into a slippery obstacle course, making every step treacherous while reducing visibility to mere meters in some places. Tank Williams lived up to his nickname, his massive frame absorbing the weight of his machine gun and extra ammunition while he laid down devastating suppressing fire. His weapon spoke in controlled bursts, each one carefully aimed to keep the Taliban fighters' heads down while his teammates moved. The distinctive sound of his M249 had become a lifeline for the team, a mechanical heartbeat that meant they were still in the fight. Rodriguez reached the cave entrance first, his demolitions training making him naturally cautious about entering unknown spaces. He quickly cleared the immediate area with his rifle light, revealing a system of natural chambers that extended deep into the mountainside. The caves had clearly been used before. Rodriguez could see evidence of previous occupation in the form of old cooking fires and discarded equipment. Park and Novak arrived next, carrying Foster between them on the improvised stretcher. The young SEAL had lost consciousness during the movement, his face gray with blood loss despite Park's best efforts to stabilize him. The medic immediately began setting up a makeshift aid station in the deepest part of the cave, using their remaining medical supplies to continue fighting for Foster's life. Morrison was the last to enter, turning to provide covering fire as Tank executed his own fighting withdrawal to the cave. The big SEAL moved with surprising grace for his size, bounding from rock to rock while enemy bullets sparked off the stone around him. A Taliban fighter appeared from behind a boulder 20 meters away, raising his AK-47 toward Tank's exposed position. Chen's rifle spoke from her distant overwatch position, and the enemy fighter dropped instantly. Her shot had traveled nearly a mile through wind and rain to find its target at the exact moment it mattered most. Morrison keyed his radio to thank her, but her response cut him off before he could speak. Phoenix lead, save the thank you. I'm seeing movement all around your position. They're setting up a perimeter to keep you trapped in there. Tank made it to the cave entrance just as the first organized assault began. The Taliban fighters had regrouped after Rodriguez's devastating explosion and were now attacking with disciplined fire and movement tactics. Morrison realized they were facing a much more sophisticated enemy than initial intelligence had suggested. The cave system provided excellent defensive positions, but it was also a potential tomb. There was only one entrance, which meant only one way out. If the enemy decided to simply wait them out or bring up heavy weapons, the SEALs would have no options for escape or maneuver. Novak worked frantically to establish communications with higher headquarters while Park continued treating Foster in the dim light of their tactical flashlights. The young SEAL's vital signs were stabilizing, but he needed immediate evacuation to a trauma center if he was going to survive. Rodriguez conducted a quick reconnaissance of the cave system, discovering that it extended much deeper than initially apparent. "Boss," he reported, "this thing goes back at least 100 meters. There might be another way out, but it's going to take time to explore." Outside, the sound of incoming vehicles grew louder despite the rain. Chen provided a running commentary of the enemy's disposition as more fighters arrived to reinforce those already in position. "Phoenix lead, I count at least 3 technical vehicles with heavy machine guns. They're setting up overwatch positions on the ridgelines around your cave. Morrison assessed their tactical situation with the cold calculation that had kept him alive through multiple deployments. They had perhaps 2 hours of ammunition for a sustained firefight, limited medical supplies, and no realistic prospect of extraction until the weather cleared. On the positive side, they held defensible terrain and had eliminated a significant enemy weapons cache. The first probing attack came within minutes of their arrival in the cave. A small group of Taliban fighters approached the entrance under covering fire from their comrades positioned on the surrounding slopes. Tank's machine gun met them with deadly accurate fire, dropping 2 attackers immediately and forcing the others to seek cover. Chen continued to provide precision fire support from her ridge position, but Morrison could hear the strain in her voice as she reported her ammunition status.
Phoenix lead, I'm down to my last 20 rounds of match-grade ammunition.
After that, I'll have to switch to standard ball ammo, which means less precision at this range. The enemy wasn't content to simply trade shots with the trapped SEALs. Morrison watched through his scope as they began moving heavy weapons into position, including what appeared to be a recoilless rifle that could make short work of their cave defenses.
Novak finally managed to establish satellite communication with their headquarters, but the news wasn't encouraging.
Boss, weather forecast shows this storm system sticking around for at least 6 more hours. No air support possible until it clears. Park looked up from Foster's still form with worry etched on his face.
He needs blood, and he needs it soon.
I've done everything I can with what we have, but without a transfusion and proper surgical facilities, he's not going to make it. The weight of command pressed down on Morrison's shoulders like a physical force. Every decision he made in the next few hours would determine whether his team lived or died in this remote Afghan valley. He had led men through countless operations, but none where the stakes felt quite this personal.
Rodriguez returned from his exploration of the cave system with mixed news.
There's definitely another way out, but it's going to require some serious climbing and crawling. The passage gets pretty narrow in places, and, with Foster's condition, I don't know if we can move him through there. Tank reported movement outside the cave entrance, his night vision scope revealing enemy fighters attempting to position charges near their defensive positions. Morrison made the call to engage, and Tank's precise fire disrupted the attack before the demolitions could be placed.
The Taliban response was immediate and overwhelming.
Heavy machine gun fire raked the cave entrance, sending rock fragments flying through the air like shrapnel. Morrison pressed himself against the cave wall as bullets ricocheted off the stone around him, the sound deafening in the confined space. Chen's voice cut through the chaos on their radio frequency, urgent and professional despite the impossible shot she was about to attempt.
Phoenix lead, I've got eyes on their heavy weapons position.
I can take out the recoilless rifle crew, but I need you to keep their heads down for about 30 seconds. Morrison coordinated suppressing fire from his entire team, their combined firepower forcing the enemy to seek cover while Chen lined up her shot. The Marine sniper was attempting to hit a target the size of a dinner plate at nearly 1,500 meters in wind and rain. It was the kind of shot that legends were made of, if it worked. The crack of Chen's rifle was barely audible over the sound of the storm and ongoing gunfire, but its effect was immediate. The recoilless rifle position erupted in secondary explosions as ammunition cooked off, eliminating the immediate threat to the cave position.
Target neutralized, Chen reported with professional calm,
but Morrison could hear the relief in her voice. That single shot had bought them precious time and eliminated their most pressing threat.
Novak intercepted enemy radio transmissions that Rodriguez translated from the local dialect. The Taliban commander was growing frustrated with his inability to dislodge the American forces from their position.
More concerning was the mention of additional heavy weapons being brought up from a supply depot in the valley below.
Morrison realized they needed to break the tactical stalemate before the enemy brought overwhelming firepower to bear on their position.
The cave provided protection, but it was also a trap that limited their options for maneuver or escape. Park worked continuously on Foster, using every trick he had learned in years of combat medicine to keep the young SEAL alive. The makeshift aid station had become a small miracle of battlefield medicine, with 4 bags hanging from rifle slings and monitoring equipment powered by spare batteries. The sound of helicopter rotors appeared briefly above the storm, raising hopes that extraction might be possible despite the weather. But, the aircraft was forced to turn back when heavy machine gun fire erupted from multiple positions around the valley.
The Taliban had positioned anti-aircraft weapons specifically to prevent American air support from reaching the trap seals.
Rodriguez continued his reconnaissance of the cave system, mapping potential routes and identifying obstacles that would need to be overcome. The alternative exit he had discovered led to a position several hundred meters from their current location, but reaching it would require carrying Foster through passages barely wide enough for a single person.
Tank reported that his ammunition was running low after hours of steady engagement with enemy forces.
The machine gunner had been the backbone of their defense, but even his impressive firepower had limits. Morrison began calculating how to redistribute their remaining ammunition to maintain effective defensive fire. Chen provided updates on enemy movements, tracking reinforcements as they arrived and positioned themselves around the cave entrance. Her reports painted a picture of a well-coordinated enemy force that was growing stronger with each passing hour while the SEAL team's resources dwindled. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly desperate when Novak picked up radio traffic indicating that the Taliban commander was planning to use poison gas to flush the Americans from their cave positions. Morrison felt ice form in his stomach as he realized their defensive advantages could be turned against them if the enemy decided to simply pump toxic chemicals into the confined space. Morrison made the decision that would define the rest of the operation. They couldn't stay in the cave, and they couldn't fight their way out through the main entrance. The only option was Rodriguez's alternative route, regardless of Foster's condition or the challenges it presented. Park looked up from his patient with the expression of a man facing an impossible choice. "Boss, moving him could kill him, but staying here definitely will. I need to make the call as his medic." The young hospital corpsman had served with distinction through multiple deployments, but this was the kind of decision that would haunt him forever regardless of the outcome. Foster was stable for the moment, but the stress of movement through confined passages could easily trigger fatal complications. Rodriguez began preparing demolition charges to seal the cave entrance behind them once they began their movement through the alternative route. If they were going to risk everything on a desperate escape attempt, they needed to ensure the enemy couldn't follow them through the same path. Tank would have to abandon his machine gun in favor of equipment more suitable for cave crawling, a decision that felt like losing a limb after years of partnership with the weapon that had kept him and his teammates alive through countless engagements. Chen reported that the enemy was beginning to move equipment toward the cave entrance, likely preparing for their chemical attack or another attempt to breach their defenses with explosives. Time was running out for any escape attempt, and the weather showed no signs of improving. Morrison gathered his team around Foster's still form and explained their situation with brutal honesty. They could stay and fight until their ammunition ran out, they could surrender and likely face torture and execution, or they could attempt the desperate escape through unknown passages deep in the mountain. The vote was unanimous without a word being spoken. These men had volunteered for the most dangerous missions their country could offer, and they weren't about to give up while they still had options. Foster stirred briefly as they prepared to move him, his eyes opening long enough to nod his agreement with whatever plan would give his teammates the best chance of survival. As they prepared to leave the relative safety of their defensive positions for the unknown dangers of the deep cave system, Morrison couldn't help but think about the families who would never see their loved ones again if this desperate gamble failed. The weight of command had never felt heavier than it did in that moment. With the lives of 5 exceptional men resting entirely on his decisions, the journey through the cave system began as a controlled nightmare that quickly descended into something far worse. Rodriguez led the way, his tactical light cutting through absolute darkness as he navigated passages that seemed to grow narrower with each step. Behind him, Morrison helped carry Foster's makeshift stretcher while Park monitored their patient's vital signs by feel, unable to use any lighting that might give away their position. The cave floor was uneven and treacherous, with loose rocks that threatened to twist ankles. Park examined their patient in the dim light of a shielded flashlight, his face grave as he assessed Foster's condition. The young SEAL's blood pressure was dropping despite their best efforts, and the stress of movement through the caves was clearly taking its toll. They needed to find a way across the underground stream, but any delay increased the risk of losing Foster entirely. Rodriguez explored upstream and downstream, looking for a crossing point that would allow them to continue their escape. The cave system was more extensive than anyone had imagined, with multiple chambers and passages that could lead anywhere. Without proper mapping or navigation equipment, they were essentially blind, following passages that might lead to freedom or deeper into the mountain. Tank discovered evidence that the caves had been used recently, finding discarded food containers and ammunition boxes that suggested Taliban forces had stored supplies throughout the system. The realization that they might encounter enemy fighters in the passages added another layer of danger to their already desperate situation. Morrison made the decision to split their limited resources, sending Rodriguez ahead to scout for crossing points while the rest of the team maintained security around Foster's position. The separation went against every instinct he had as a team leader, but their circumstances demanded calculated risks that would have been unthinkable under normal conditions. Chen's voice crackled through their radio with an update that changed everything.
Phoenix Lead, I'm observing enemy forces entering the cave system behind you. Looks like they've found your alternate route. You've got company coming. The news hit the team like a physical blow.
Their escape route had been compromised, and they were now trapped between enemy forces ahead and behind them in an underground maze where their tactical advantages were severely limited. Morrison felt the walls of the cave system closing in around them, both literally and figuratively. Rodriguez returned with news of a potential crossing point 50 meters upstream, but it would require ropes and technical climbing skills to traverse safely. More critically, it would be nearly impossible to carry Foster across without risking his life or alerting the pursuing Taliban forces to their exact position. Park made the hardest decision of his military career, recommending that they leave Foster in a secured position while the team established a crossing point and, then, returned for him. The alternative was risking everyone's life for one man, a calculation that went against every principle of Special Operations Brotherhood. Foster stirred briefly, his eyes opening long enough to shake his head weakly at Park's suggestion. Even in his weakened state, the young SEAL understood the tactical situation and refused to be the reason his teammates might not make it home. His whispered words were barely audible above the sound of rushing water, but their meaning was clear to everyone present. Morrison overruled both Park and Foster, making the command decision that they would all cross together or not at all. It was a choice that flew in the face of tactical logic, but it reflected the bonds that held special operations teams together even in the face of impossible odds. Tank volunteered to attempt the crossing first, his size and strength making him the logical choice to establish an anchor point for the ropes they would need. The big SEAL stripped down to essential gear and waded into the frigid underground stream, immediately feeling the current's power as it tried to sweep him downstream into darkness. The crossing took nearly an hour of painstaking work, with Tank establishing multiple anchor points while Rodriguez rigged a system of ropes and pulleys that could support Foster's stretcher. Every minute they spent in the cave system increased the likelihood that pursuing Taliban forces would catch up to them. Novak reported intercepted communications indicating that the enemy had split into multiple search teams to comb through the cave passages. Their pursuers were moving faster than expected, unencumbered by wounded personnel and familiar with the cave system from previous use as a supply depot and defensive position. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the cave passages as Taliban search teams encountered each other in the darkness, their lack of coordination causing friendly fire incidents that bought the SEAL team precious time. Morrison realized that the enemy's numerical advantage was partially offset by the confusion and poor communication inherent in underground operations. Park worked continuously to stabilize Foster for the crossing, using the last of their intravenous fluids and pain medication to prepare him for what would likely be the most dangerous part of their escape attempt. The medic's hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the stress and limited lighting, performing medical miracles with equipment designed for field conditions. The crossing began with Novak going first, carrying essential communications equipment and establishing security on the far side of the underground stream. His technical skills would be critical if they managed to escape the cave system and needed to coordinate extraction with friendly forces. Rodriguez followed with demolition equipment and additional medical supplies, his expertise in explosives potentially critical if they needed to seal passages behind them or create new routes through the cave system. The demolitions expert moved with the careful precision of a man who understood that one mistake could bring tons of rock down on their heads. Tank remained on the original side of the stream to help with Foster's crossing, his strength essential for managing the rope system they had rigged to transport their wounded teammate. The machine gunner had reluctantly left his beloved weapon behind, but he carried enough ammunition and explosives to make him dangerous even without his primary armament. The moment came when they had to commit Foster to the rope system, trusting their improvised engineering and the strength of anchor points they couldn't properly test. Park accompanied the stretcher, monitoring Foster's condition throughout the crossing while Morrison provided security and managed the rope system from the original side. Halfway across, disaster struck when one of their anchor points began to fail under the combined weight of Foster, Park, and their equipment. The stretcher tilted dangerously toward the rushing water as Tank fought to maintain control of the rope system, his massive hands gripping the lines with desperate strength. Morrison immediately jumped into the stream to provide additional support, the frigid water shocking his system as the current attempted to sweep him downstream. Between Tank's strength and Morrison's additional support, they managed to stabilize the crossing long enough for Park and Foster to reach the far side safely. The final crossing belonged to Morrison and Tank, both men exhausted from their efforts to save Foster but knowing that Taliban search teams were growing closer with each passing minute. They moved as quickly as possible while maintaining security, each man covering the other as they traversed the dangerous crossing point. Rodriguez had identified their next route while the crossing was taking place, finding a passage that led upward toward what appeared to be natural light filtering down from above. The possibility of reaching the surface provided hope, but it also meant exposure to enemy observation and potential sniper fire. The climb began immediately after the crossing, with the team moving through increasingly narrow passages that required them to crawl on hands and knees while carrying Foster and their remaining equipment. The physical demands were enormous, complicated by altitude, injuries, and the stress of continuous operations without rest. Park reported that Foster's condition was stabilizing despite the ordeal of the cave crossing, but warned that their patient needed immediate medical evacuation if he was going to survive. The young SEAL had lost more blood than anyone should survive, kept alive only by Park's skill and the incredible determination that characterized Special Operations Forces. Chen's voice reached them through improving radio communications as they climbed toward the surface, her report painting a picture of massive enemy reinforcements converging on the valley. Phoenix lead, I count at least 200 fighters moving into positions around the entire area. They're not just trying to catch you, they're trying to eliminate any possibility of rescue. The realization that their escape from the caves might simply be trading one trap for another weighed heavily on Morrison as he continued climbing through passages that grew lighter with each step. They were ascending toward daylight, but also toward an enemy force that had spent hours preparing positions specifically designed to kill American Special Operations Forces. Novak picked up radio transmissions indicating that Taliban commanders were coordinating with other insurgent groups to create an overwhelming force advantage. The SEAL team wasn't just facing local fighters anymore, they were confronting a coalition of enemy forces determined to score a propaganda victory by eliminating an entire American Special Operations team. The passage they were following opened into a larger chamber with multiple exits, creating the first real decision point they had encountered since entering the cave system. Rodriguez conducted quick reconnaissance of each option while the rest of the team secured Foster and prepared for whatever challenges awaited them on the surface. Tank discovered abandoned equipment in the chamber, including weapons and ammunition that suggested Taliban forces had been using the caves as a long-term base of operations. The find provided them with additional firepower, but also confirmed that they were likely moving through enemy-controlled territory. Morrison gathered his team around Foster's stretcher and laid out their tactical situation with brutal honesty. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating in terrain that favored their enemies. Their only advantages were their training, their brotherhood, and the support of a Marine sniper who had already proven herself capable of impossible shots. The choice of which passage to take would likely determine whether they lived or died, but they had no reliable intelligence about what lay beyond any of the options. Morrison made the command decision based on gut instinct and years of experience, choosing the route that felt most likely to lead them away from the main enemy concentrations. As they prepared to leave the relative safety of the underground chamber, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that their real test was still ahead of them. The caves had been difficult, but the surface would expose them to the full weight of enemy firepower while limiting their options for cover and concealment. Everything they had endured so far might prove to be nothing more than preparation for the final battle that awaited them in the mountains above. The passage Morrison had chosen led them through a maze of natural corridors that gradually ascended toward what appeared to be daylight filtering through cracks in the mountain above. The team moved in single file, with Rodriguez maintaining point while Park monitored Foster's condition during the grueling climb. Every step brought them closer to the surface, but also closer to whatever trap awaited them in the open air. Tank's massive frame was struggling with the confines of the narrow passages, his shoulders scraping against rock walls as he maneuvered through spaces barely wide enough for a normal-sized person. Despite the physical challenges, the Big SEAL maintained his position in the team's movement order, carrying extra equipment and ammunition that would be critical once they reached the surface. Novak continued monitoring enemy communications through his headset, providing hand signals to communicate critical intelligence without breaking radio silence. The Taliban forces were growing increasingly frustrated with their inability to locate the escaping Americans, but their search was becoming more systematic and thorough with each passing hour. The first hint of natural light appeared after 2 hours of climbing, a faint glow that seemed impossibly bright after the absolute darkness of the deep cave system. Rodriguez approached the potential exit with extreme caution, knowing that emerging into daylight could expose the entire team to enemy observation and sniper fire. The cave opening was smaller than hoped, requiring each team member to squeeze through individually while remaining vulnerable to enemy fire during the transition. Morrison realized they would need to coordinate their emergence carefully to avoid being picked off one at a time as they left the relative safety of the underground passages. Rodriguez conducted a careful reconnaissance of the area beyond the cave opening, using a small mirror to observe the surrounding terrain without exposing himself to direct observation. His report was both encouraging and terrifying. They had emerged on the opposite side of the valley from their original position, but Taliban forces had established observation posts on the surrounding ridgelines. Park assessed Foster's condition in the improved lighting, his professional demeanor masking concern about their patient's deteriorating vital signs. The young SEAL needed immediate medical evacuation, but emerging from the cave would expose them to enemy fire and potentially make rescue impossible. Chen's voice crackled through their radio with an update that changed their tactical situation completely.
Phoenix Lead, I'm repositioning to maintain overwatch on your new location. Be advised, there's a Taliban observation post approximately 300 meters north of your cave exit. 2 fighters with radio equipment and what appears to be a sniper rifle. The news meant their escape route was compromised before they even emerged from the caves. Morrison faced another impossible decision: remain underground where Foster would likely die from his injuries, or emerge into a carefully prepared killing zone where all of them might be eliminated within minutes. Tank volunteered to create a distraction that would draw enemy attention away from the cave exit, despite knowing that exposing himself to enemy fire would likely be a suicide mission. The machine gunner's willingness to sacrifice himself for his teammates reflected the brotherhood that bound special operations forces together even in the face of certain death. Rodriguez proposed using his remaining explosives to create multiple distractions, potentially allowing the team to emerge during the confusion and chaos that would follow. The demolitions expert calculated that he could create enough noise and smoke to mask their movement, but the technique would also alert every enemy force in the valley to their exact location. Morrison weighed their limited options while Foster's life hung in the balance, knowing that every minute of delay decreased their chances of successful extraction. The storm that had been raging throughout the night was finally beginning to clear, which would allow air support but also improve visibility for enemy observers. Novak intercepted communications indicating that Taliban commanders were planning a coordinated assault on suspected American positions throughout the valley. The enemy was preparing to saturate the entire area with firepower, making survival increasingly unlikely regardless of what tactics the SEAL team employed. Park made the medical recommendation that would haunt him for the rest of his career, advising Morrison that Foster had perhaps 30 minutes before blood loss and shock made survival impossible. The young SEAL's sacrifice had bought his teammates time, but that time was rapidly running out despite everyone's best efforts. The decision to emerge from the cave was made for them when sounds of enemy movement echoed through the passages behind them, indicating that Taliban search teams had finally found their route through the underground system. The SEAL team was trapped between enemy forces above and below ground, with no remaining options for concealment or delay. Rodriguez prepared his explosives for immediate detonation while Tank positioned himself to provide covering fire once they emerged from the cave. The Big SEAL had salvaged enemy weapons during their underground journey, giving him additional firepower despite losing his beloved machine gun in the earlier cave crossing. Morrison coordinated their emergence with Chen's overwatch, timing their movement to coincide with her engagement of the nearest enemy observation post.
The Marine sniper would need to eliminate multiple targets in rapid succession to give the SEAL team any chance of reaching defensive positions before being overwhelmed by enemy fire.
The moment arrived with Chen's first shot, a perfect hit that eliminated the Taliban sniper before he could engage the emerging Americans.
Her second shot dropped the radio operator, preventing him from alerting other enemy forces to the SEAL team's exact location. Both shots were fired at distances exceeding 800 meters in variable wind conditions. Rodriguez emerged first, immediately throwing smoke grenades to mask the team's movement while Tank provided suppressing fire towards suspected enemy positions. The demolitions experts' explosives detonated simultaneously across multiple locations, creating the chaos and confusion necessary for their desperate escape attempt. Park and Novak emerged carrying Foster between them, the medic continuously monitoring their patient's condition while navigating the treacherous terrain outside the cave. Foster remained unconscious but stable, his survival now dependent entirely on reaching friendly forces within the next 20 minutes. Morrison was the last to emerge, coordinating suppressing fire while ensuring all team members reached defensive positions among the rocks outside the cave entrance. The lieutenant commander's leadership had kept his team together through impossible circumstances, but the final test of their survival was just beginning. The Taliban response was immediate and overwhelming, with automatic weapons fire erupting from multiple positions as enemy forces converged on the SEAL team's location. Morrison realized they had walked into another carefully prepared trap, with enemy forces positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that would be nearly impossible to escape. Tank's captured enemy weapon provided devastating suppressing fire that forced Taliban fighters to seek cover, but the machine gunner was severely outgunned by the number of enemy positions surrounding their location.
His ammunition would not last long against the concentrated firepower being brought to bear against them.
Chen continued providing precision fire support from her overwatch position, but even her exceptional marksmanship could not eliminate enough targets to significantly change the tactical balance. The Marine sniper was running low on ammunition after hours of continuous engagement, and her position was becoming increasingly exposed to enemy counter-sniper fire. Rodriguez used his remaining explosives to create defensive positions among the rocks, but the charges also revealed their exact location to every enemy force in the valley. The demolitions experts' techniques were keeping them alive in the short term while potentially sealing their fate in the longer engagement that was developing.
Novak finally established reliable communication with friendly air support, but the pilots reported that enemy anti-aircraft positions prevented them from approaching close enough to provide effective fire support. The SEAL team was on their own against overwhelming enemy forces, with no realistic prospect of reinforcement or extraction. Park worked desperately to stabilize Foster using the last of their medical supplies, knowing that their patient would not survive much longer without professional medical treatment. The hospital corpsmen had performed miracles throughout their ordeal, but human physiology had limits that even the best field medicine could not overcome indefinitely. The enemy assault intensified as Taliban forces realized they had trapped an entire American Special Operations team in the open with limited ammunition and no escape routes. Morrison could see enemy fighters maneuvering to surround their position completely, cutting off any possibility of withdrawal to defensive terrain. Chen's voice cut through the chaos of battle with a report that chilled Morrison's blood. Phoenix Lead, I'm observing heavy weapons being moved into position against you. Mortars and what appears to be a recoilless rifle. You've got maybe 5 minutes before they bring overwhelming firepower to bear.
The tactical situation had become hopeless by any objective measure. The SEAL team was surrounded, outgunned, and running out of ammunition while carrying a critically wounded teammate who could not be moved without risking his life. Morrison faced the kind of command decision that would define him forever, regardless of whether he survived to remember it. Tank reported that his ammunition was nearly exhausted after providing continuous covering fire for his teammates, but the machine gunner continued engaging enemy targets with captured weapons and sheer determination. His suppressing fire had been the primary factor keeping Taliban forces from overrunning their position completely. Rodriguez announced that he had one final explosive charge remaining, large enough to create significant tactical effect but also large enough to potentially eliminate friendly forces if used incorrectly. The demolitions expert was calculating angles and distances for a charge that might save his teammates or kill them all. Foster stirred briefly, his eyes opening long enough to meet Morrison's gaze with perfect understanding of their situation. The young SEAL's expression conveyed acceptance and gratitude, the look of a warrior who had given everything for his brothers and found peace in the knowledge that his sacrifice had meaning. Park made the final medical assessment that would determine their remaining options, reporting that Foster could survive perhaps 10 more minutes without immediate surgical intervention. The hospital corpsman's professional judgment meant they were facing the ultimate test of special operations brotherhood, whether to risk everyone's life for one man or accept the unacceptable. Morrison keyed his radio to Chen's frequency, knowing that their survival now depended entirely on a Marine sniper who had already performed miracles throughout their ordeal. The shot she was about to attempt would require everything she had learned in years of training, combined with the kind of courage that could only be measured when everything was on the line. The lieutenant commander looked at his team gathered in their final defensive position, each man ready to give his life for the others despite knowing their situation was hopeless. These were the kind of warriors that America sent to the most dangerous places in the world, and they were about to prove why the trust was never misplaced. Chen's response came through their radio with the calm professionalism that had characterized her throughout their ordeal, but Morrison could hear something different in her voice now. The Marine sniper was preparing for a shot that would either save them all or mark the end of their desperate fight for survival in the mountains of Afghanistan. Chen had been calculating the shot for nearly 10 minutes, her scope tracking between multiple high-value targets while she assessed wind conditions, range estimates, and the tactical impact of each potential engagement. From her overwatch position on the distant ridge, she could see the entire battlefield spread below her like a deadly chess match where one wrong move would result in the elimination of Morrison's entire team. The Marine sniper had identified the key to the Taliban's tactical success, a single enemy commander who was coordinating the complex assault from a position nearly 1,200 meters from her rifle. The man was using hand signals and radio communications to direct multiple groups of fighters, creating the kind of coordinated attack that could overwhelm even the most skilled special operations forces. What made the shot nearly impossible was not just the extreme range and difficult conditions, but the fact that the target was positioned behind partial cover that left only inches of exposure at irregular intervals. Chen would have perhaps a 2-second window when the commander emerged to direct his forces, and missing would alert the entire enemy force to her exact position. Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece with the kind of calm that came only from accepting impossible circumstances. Overwatch, we're down to our last magazines and Foster won't make it another 5 minutes. If you've got a miracle shot, now would be the time. Tank's machine gun had fallen silent as his ammunition finally ran out, forcing the Big SEAL to rely on captured enemy weapons and the few remaining grenades in their possession. Rodriguez was preparing his final explosive charge, calculating placement that would maximize tactical effect while minimizing risk to friendly forces caught in the blast radius. Park continued working on Foster despite knowing that field medicine had reached its limits, the hospital corpsman's hands moving with practiced efficiency as he fought to keep their teammate alive through sheer determination and professional skill. Foster's vital signs were failing despite everyone's best efforts, his survival now measured in minutes rather than hours. Novak intercepted enemy radio transmissions indicating that the Taliban commander was preparing for a final assault that would overrun the SEAL position within minutes. The communications specialist could hear the confidence in the enemy leader's voice as he directed his forces into position for what he clearly expected to be the decisive engagement. Chen adjusted her scope for the 12th time, accounting for wind changes that could push her bullet off target by several inches at the extreme range she was attempting. The Marine sniper had made difficult shots throughout her career, but nothing approached the technical and tactical complexity of what she was attempting in the mountains of Afghanistan. The target appeared briefly in her scope, the Taliban commander gesturing toward Morrison's position while speaking into his radio handset. Chen's finger began applying pressure to her trigger, but the target disappeared behind cover before she could complete the shot. She would have to wait for another opportunity that might never come. Morrison coordinated his team's remaining ammunition and explosives, calculating that they had perhaps 3 minutes of effective defensive fire before being completely overwhelmed by enemy forces. The lieutenant commander had led his men through impossible situations before, but none where their survival depended entirely on factors beyond their control. Tank spotted enemy fighters beginning their final approach, dozens of Chen saw her target appear again in her scope, the Taliban commander now fully exposed as he gestured for his forces to begin their final assault. The Marine sniper began her breathing cycle, slowing her heart rate and steadying her hands for a shot that would either save 6 American lives or mark the beginning of their final moments. The crosshairs settled on the enemy commander's center mass as Chen began applying pressure to her trigger with the smooth, steady pull that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. At 1,200 meters in variable wind conditions, even a perfect shot would require an element of luck that she couldn't control. Morrison watched enemy forces beginning their coordinated assault from multiple directions, their movement showing the kind of tactical sophistication that had made this enemy force so dangerous throughout the operation. The SEAL team's defensive position was about to be overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower, with no remaining options for maneuver or escape. Tank opened fire with his captured weapon, dropping 2 Taliban fighters before the rest sought cover and began returning accurate fire that forced the Big SEAL to keep his head down. The machine gunners suppressing fire bought precious seconds for his teammates, but everyone knew their defensive fire could not hold off the coming assault. Chen's rifle spoke with the distinctive crack that had marked every critical moment of their desperate fight for survival, the bullet beginning its journey across nearly 3/4 of a mile of mountain air toward a target that represented their only hope of living through the next 5 minutes. The shot was perfect, striking the Taliban commander in the center of his chest and dropping him instantly to the rocky ground where he had been directing the coordinated assault. The effect on enemy forces was immediate and dramatic, as individual groups of fighters lost their coordination and began operating independently without central command. Morrison heard the confusion in enemy radio transmissions as Taliban forces struggled to maintain their assault without the leadership that had made their attack so effective. The elimination of their commander had disrupted their tactical coordination at the most critical moment, giving the SEAL team a window of opportunity they hadn't dared hope for. Rodriguez detonated his final explosive charge at the moment when enemy forces were most clustered together, the blast eliminating nearly a dozen Taliban fighters and creating enough chaos to further disrupt their assault. The demolitions experts' timing had been perfect, maximizing tactical effect when the enemy was most vulnerable to concentrated fire. Tank resumed his suppressing fire with renewed hope, engaging targets of opportunity while enemy forces struggled to reorganize their attack without central coordination. The machine gunner's accurate fire was keeping Taliban fighters pinned down during the critical minutes when they should have been overrunning the SEAL position. Chen continued engaging high-value targets from her overwatch position, her precision fire eliminating enemy leaders and heavy weapons crews that posed the greatest threat to Morrison's team. The Marine sniper had found her rhythm, placing shot after shot exactly where they were needed most to disrupt the enemy assault. Park reported that Foster's condition was stabilizing as the immediate threat of enemy assault decreased, giving the medic hope that their patient might survive long enough for evacuation if friendly forces could reach their position.
The hospital corpsman resumed his life-saving efforts with renewed determination.
Novak established communication with incoming air support, directing close air support aircraft toward the most dangerous enemy concentrations while marking friendly positions to prevent fratricide. The communications specialists' coordination was finally bringing overwhelming American firepower to bear on the Taliban forces that had trapped them. The first airstrike landed among enemy positions with devastating effect, eliminating organized resistance and forcing surviving Taliban fighters to flee toward defensive positions deeper in the mountains.
Morrison's team watched in amazement as aircraft they couldn't see delivered precision munitions that turned the tactical situation completely in their favor.
Morrison coordinated his team's movement toward the designated extraction point, finally, able to leave their defensive positions after hours of desperate fighting. The lieutenant commander's leadership had kept his men together through impossible circumstances, proving once again that American Special Operations Forces never quit fighting regardless of the odds against them. Tank helped carry Foster toward the extraction zone, the machine gunner's strength critical for moving their wounded teammate across terrain that remained dangerous despite the air support overhead. The Big SEAL's determination had been a constant throughout their ordeal, inspiring his teammates when hope seemed lost. Rodriguez conducted rearguard security as the team moved, ensuring that no surviving enemy forces could interfere with their extraction. The demolitions experts' expertise had been critical throughout their escape, from destroying enemy weapons caches to creating the diversions that allowed their survival. Park continued monitoring Foster's condition during their movement to the extraction point, the medic's skills having kept their teammate alive through injuries that should have been fatal. The hospital corpsman's dedication represented the best traditions of special operations medicine under impossible conditions. Chen provided overwatch during the team's movement, her precision fire eliminating any remaining threats that might interfere with their extraction. The Marine snipers' shooting had been legendary throughout their ordeal, culminating in the impossible shot that saved them all when everything seemed lost. Novak coordinated with incoming rescue aircraft, ensuring that extraction would proceed smoothly despite the continued presence of enemy forces in the surrounding area. The communications specialists' technical expertise had maintained their connection to friendly forces when everything depended on calling for help. The rescue helicopter appeared over the ridgeline exactly on schedule, its crew ready to extract the SEAL team and rush Foster to the trauma center where his life could be saved. Morrison felt the weight of command lifting from his shoulders as he realized that all his men would be going home despite the impossible odds they had faced. Foster stirred briefly as they loaded him into the aircraft, his eyes opening long enough to see his teammates gathered around him with expressions of relief and brotherhood that said everything about the bonds forged in combat. The young SEAL's sacrifice had brought them together in ways that would last for the rest of their lives. Chen's voice came through their radio one final time as the helicopter lifted off from the mountain extraction zone.
Phoenix lead, mission complete. All elements accounted for and returning to base.
The words carried the weight of everything they had endured together, from the initial ambush through the desperate escape and the impossible shot that changed everything. Morrison looked down at the valley where they had nearly died, knowing that the story of their survival would become legend among special operations forces who understood the meaning of brotherhood, sacrifice, and never leaving a fallen comrade behind. Foster survived his injuries and returned to duty 6 months later, bearing scars that told the story of a team that refused to quit when everything seemed hopeless. Chen received the Silver Star for her precision shooting under impossible conditions, though she always insisted that her teammates were the real heroes of their desperate fight in the Afghan mountains. The mission that had begun as a routine elimination of a high-value target became a testament to the training, courage, and brotherhood that define American Special Operations Forces when they face impossible odds in the world's most dangerous places.